Welcome to this discussion where we focus on building resilient cities and really aim to answer the question how to ensure security, especially in the face of crisis and disruption. We know the future is still cities. We love the energy of cities. It will always be. So we need to talk smart infrastructure and how we're really going to take it to the next digital level. So with me in this discussion, I have Nadimeh Mehra, Vice President of District 2020, joins us from Dubai. Thank you. And Dave Hopping, CEO of Solutions and Services at Siemens Smart Infrastructure in Florida. Thank you, Dave, for joining us. I'm here in Zug. Welcome. So we're still in the pandemic, but can you tell me in your own words what shortcomings have been exposed in this smart infrastructure space when we've sort of navigated this pandemic as best we can? Nadimeh, maybe you would like to answer that first.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the key themes that came out was really about digitalization and how it's no longer really a nice to have, it's a must have. And it's absolutely crucial for long-term resiliency. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think that that digital transformation will hold the key to healthier and safer cities, for sure.
And what would you personally like to have seen throughout this pandemic that was already in place that perhaps wasn't as advanced as it should have been?
Dubai really dealt with the systems that Dubai had in place to deal with the pandemic came online so swiftly, to be honest with you, that and our smart city foundation for Dubai was laid well before the pandemic, and a lot of the government institutions were already talking to each other. So we have an app in Dubai called Al Hus, which you go on. It makes everything logging in easier about the COVID, testing for COVID, getting your vaccines. They've got all the data that they require, and it's about data. It's analyzing that data. And that, I think, is important. And the government's reaction to keep their citizens safe and the city's reaction to keep cities safe.
It really did shine a light on the importance of the circulation of information at real time, in fact.
Absolutely. It really did.
Dave.
And that's one thing, sorry, just to continue, it's one thing we learned as we're planning for the District 2020, which is the future city of Expo 2020. And it's we always say we're hosting an event in a city for 6 months. The event goes away and the city remains. But part of that planning is still underway. And we did a bit of a pivot to make sure that our systems that are in place will be able to continue to provide us with data and smart city analysis as required.
Thank you, Nadimeh. Dave, from a Siemens perspective, what do we really mean by a resilient city? I know Nadimeh kindly pointed out the idea of keeping citizens safe as number one, but what does it really mean in the bigger picture when we think about transport and resources and energies?
Yeah, really good question. First of all, Nadimeh, it's great to see you virtually, and you have a really interesting project going over there in Dubai. But back to the question, yeah, I think the question that you asked, Nadimeh, really brings into the forefront this word resiliency, because for me, resiliency is a little linked to reliability. I think reliability is the output or what people expect, but resiliency is really the ability to prepare for the operation and to prepare for what might happen. And it's the ability of systems to really survive and thrive in the face of increased complexity, uncertainty, and really a ever-changing future. And I think this is what happened with the pandemic. My personal opinion is I don't think a lot of businesses and industries were prepared for this, and we were not in a position to operate in a resilient way. And so therefore, you saw a lot of supply chains being disrupted. You saw a lot of industries actually shutting down. Some stayed open better than others. But this word resiliency is what is needed. And I think what we can do is become a little bit more proactive and being able to be resilient. And I think technology and digitalization can really help with that. And then maybe one last word on this is we also need to understand that our environments are becoming, a lot more complex and under pressure. There's increasing urbanization, there's population growth, there's more and more extreme weather events. Now, this could be depending where you are in the world. So it's just not pandemics, but you have floods, you have typhoons, you have hurricanes, you have earthquakes. And so the ability to be resilient and prepare for the unknown so our system and our cities can thrive in the face of that, I think ties into that. And the pandemic was one example of that.
And of course, Dave, you're speaking about being in a position to prevent situations and being on top of them when they happen, not just reacting to events once they've happened and it's too late almost. From your experience watching this pandemic play out, where do you think in this space of resilient cities and reliability and that sort of idea of outages that could have happened, where do you see lagging most?
Yeah, I think many industries, maybe unlike over in the Expo 2020, but are slow to adopt technology and really make their infrastructure smart. And to be a little bit more specific, and let's take the pandemic, for example. I mean, when you really think about it, is the quality of the indoor air, that we breathe or the surfaces that we touch on a regular basis, is it really, why shouldn't that be safe all the time? Why do we need a pandemic to really make that happen? Or the ability to have flexible workspaces where employees can schedule when they come in or when they're not coming into like an office or work environment, or to be able to proactively coordinate when and what employees will come into a workplace on what days. I think this transponds into normal living as well, but these were just a couple examples of what we saw in the pandemic of where technology could have really helped. It's hard to predict pandemics or predict weather events, but you can definitely prepare for them, and that's where the word resilience comes
Interestingly, it really propelled the human element, and like you said, the governance and flexibility of workplaces, in addition to the more technical aspects, so hygiene and the air indoors, the quality of that air, because we do anyway spend a phenomenal amount of time indoors. And we're just going to take a pause, Dave, because we've just lost Nadimeh on the line, so we're just going to try and get her back a second. Nadimeh, great to have you back with us, albeit a slightly different background, no problem there. Now, Dave just kindly pointed out the importance of connectivity and really joining the dots between indoor air quality to hygiene and flexible working hours. Can you give us an example from Expo 2020 where all the elements have come together, be it charging stations, grids, and supplies?
Sure. So I'm going to focus a bit more on District 2020. While the Expo event itself is built for resilience, especially since we will be one of the first mega events to host a large mega event post-pandemic, we have put steps in place to ensure the comfort and security of all visitors and the participants, et cetera. But since here we're talking about the angle more from a smart city perspective, I'm going to bring it back, I think, to flexible and integrated cities. I think that is critical. And that flexibility, when integrated, will build the resilience, will build that platform that is required to ensure that the citizens are safe, that the grids, for example, are available, and that logistics and mobility, et cetera, don't come to a standstill. We've seen a great, you can see that a great example of that in the advent of e-commerce and the rise of e-commerce, and how people just switch so comfortably, or in online learning, for example. Who would have thought that one day I would be doing a fireside chat alongside Dave, who's in Florida, and I'm in Dubai, and we're still able to communicate and connect. So I think it does go back to building for a flexible, resilient cities.
I want to pick up on that flexibility. Thank you, Nadimeh. Dave, how do we manage when we don't all have the opportunity, not all cities have the opportunity to start from scratch? And sometimes you have to deal with old legacies, shelf lives. How do we deal with patchwork?
Yeah, it's a great question because, we can have these fireside chats, and I participate in a lot of smart city summits, but we also need to make it real, right? And your question, I think, relates to how do we make it real? And my personal opinion is I think technology and even tech companies need to really play a bigger role in the planning, design, and even sometimes the day-to-day running of a city. And so you're right, not every city can start from the ground up, and almost no cities have the ability to invest in smart infrastructure all at once. So to have a plan, to have partners, that can help you through this journey, whether that's, technology companies, consulting firms, or other cities in a mentor-mentee relationship, these all play a role in helping to provide for more long-term resilience and adaptability, and through a planning process, and not just through a crisis management reactive process. So this is one way that I think that it can happen. And then, of course, you also have the funding topic, which I think funding of smart infrastructure, of course, you always need to weigh the value and the cost, but the funding mechanisms and being more creative and having new business models, I think, come into play of this as well.
So innovation plus cash. Got you, Dave. Thank you. And Nadimeh, what are we referring to here? Are we talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning? How do we really take it to the next digital level?
Well, I think that it is a combination of different technologies. And so, for example, if we increasingly deploy smart sensors and virtual and augmented reality tools, and we can use those data points to continuously generate ideas from these systems, get data from these systems, and that includes IoT and big data, for example. Artificial intelligence, you can see it already playing a much larger role in healthcare and digital wellness. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. And it's exciting to see. It's exciting to see the progress that we're making in spaces that normally would have taken us years to try to find solutions for, because we're forced to find solutions for them. So I think you're going to see much more of that, and IoT will play a big role in that. So, for example, at Expo, we use a Siemens technology called MindSphere, and MindSphere is there as an analytics tool for us for all the buildings that are connected to MindSphere. And we will continue to use that in District 2020 as well, because we want those analytics. We want to be able to analyze the consumption of users, et cetera, and respond accordingly as a master developer and a city developer.
I like the example. Thank you, Nadimeh. Dave, maybe you would like to chip in and talk about some partnerships or projects you're across, cloud-based technologies or any of the above.
Yeah, I was going to just kind of have a conversation with Nadimeh on the point that she brought up, because I think this topic of IoT and data, they're nice buzzwords, but it's the technology enabling data to be able to be shared across different use cases of really where the value comes into play. And if I could, maybe 3 examples that, like in the energy space, microgrids are needed to ensure consistent power or to channel power to critical services when needed in the case of a crisis. And then in the building side, the information and the data flow is really needed to manage maybe a mass notification event to support a timely reaction or even an evacuation of a building. And then I think what's important is to look into the different types of buildings per se, or vertical markets, because they're not all the same. An office building is different than a hospital, is different than a manufacturing site, which is different than a data center. And in certain environments, it's very, very critical to continue to maintain the operation on a day-to-day. And so when you can start sharing this data across and determine like when the building's going to be used and how many people are going to be in there and who's going to be in the building at one time, you can better predict what type of energy you need or when you need the energy, or would you have the ability to utilize renewable energy or maybe even stored energy in a battery storage to help your operation become less costly, more efficient, more resilient. But the point being, you need technology and data to be able to help make all of those decisions, because doing it in a manual way will not get it done. And then if I could add one more point, this area of e-mobility, you got more and more people driving electric vehicles. If you have electrical vehicles pulling up to a site and all of a sudden you have a crisis and the power goes down, I mean, what do you do about power? I mean, you just strand the people in these vehicles. So how can you ensure that there will be power to charge the vehicles when needed? And this is where the grid edge technologies and battery storage and again, the interconnectivity of all this comes into play. So Nadimeh, I just wanted to follow up on your comment about the importance of data and the sharing of data, and how that can really play into a more efficient, resilient environment.
I agree. I think the points you raised are great, Dave, and those are all points that are incumbent upon city planners to look at, especially with the future of urban planning. And I'm going to take it one step. I'm going to actually move away from technology now and say that, in addition to all of that, the public realm that is planned for people to live in a human-centric environment, I think you're seeing a much larger move towards community-based development, and we're certainly looking at that. And so some of the softwares, for example, the systems that we're putting into place is about allowing for the residents, the citizens, the tenants of District 2020 to be able to communicate on a platform. And that platform can also be used to gather data, to utilize data to provide, again, a safer environment for people to live in. And then, as you rightly pointed out, if there is an emergency due to technology, because e-cars are great and e-mobility is great, but if we run out of juice for those cars, what are we going to do? So all of that is proactive planning, I think, versus reactive, which is where we found ourselves about a year ago. And so it's great that I think we're sitting and discussing this much more proactively.
Nadimeh, that's a great point
agree.
you make. How easy is it to rally communities to get them on board? Is there a great effort needed in terms of education, communication?
So I'm assuming this is for the adoption of technology?
Exactly. How do you get people on
city?
board, the communities to be excited about such platforms and to be involved?
What I've seen increasing a lot is living labs and people participating in that co-creation of a living lab, because they want to be part of the solution and they're more than willing to help out to see what systems can be used to make their lives more efficient, more seamless, and more sustainable. So from what I've seen, people are willing to take it on board. But I think, Dave, your input into this would be great to hear as well.
Yeah, I from my experience and talking to many customers, there is a degree of increased education that's definitely needed, because one of the topics that really comes up, just we have to be transparent about it, is data privacy. And so when you start providing more connectivity and more data, typically humans want that information. I mean, they're used to it. I mean, the smartphones has enabled that over the years, that we expect everything now and when we want it. But with that comes some responsibility and accountability, with data privacy. What data are you collecting? How are you going to use my image? What's it going to be used for? And so this is a big question that comes up. And so I do think not everybody understands the technology right away, and there's a higher degree of education that needs to be provided. And Nadimeh, I think you're absolutely right. I think the living lab environment, helps with that education into the community. doing test cases and beta cases and engaging the community into some of the new technology before it's fully deployed, I think helps with that. But to the question, yeah, I think education is definitely needed. You definitely just don't turn the switch.
At the beginning of our discussion, I mentioned the word security. We've talked a lot on resilience, but in terms of security, to what extent does surveillance play a role, either in terms of security of people, of residents, or in terms of spotting shortfalls? Maybe it's the breakdown of a vehicle, or simply just to ensure that you're spotting errors in the grid, for example?
Yeah, I'll take a first cut at this. I think security is one of the main value propositions that people are looking for. You know, secure, safe, efficient. This is beyond, you know, resilient as well. But surveillance, I think, plays a couple areas and values. First is just, are we safe? So, you know, cameras per se helps watching over and ensuring bad things don't happen. But a lot of times this information is stored or can be reactive. What we're seeing now from a technology standpoint is analytics are coming into play with the image, and the analytics can help determine what event is happening proactively to then trigger some event. So you use the example of a car breaking down. If there was a camera that caught that environment, analytics can determine that the car broke down and it could automatically dispatch help for that individual potentially on the side of the road. And so how cool is that? You know, if you're stranded and you need help, you're not looking for your phone, you're calling somebody to help them come out. You have analytics automatically determining what the issue is, what the problem is, and sends support in your way. Same thing with, you know, God forbid, a terror event or a shooting event, which we have way too many of those in the United States right now. But surveillance and analytics can determine what's happening and dispatch the authorities and police. And so these are some of the examples of surveillance, not only helping protecting either people or assets, but also analyzing the situation and then taking some action in a proactive way to help with the response.
Nadimeh, maybe you have something to add there as well.
Very little. I think, you know, Dave captured it. From an urban planning perspective, it's incumbent upon us to provide the citizens of the city and of the development with a secure environment to live in. And it's not just about, you know, the physical security. It's also about, at this moment more than ever, you know, data security, and also taking a look at how we can ensure movement of people in a secure and safe manner. A site like District 2020, which will inherit a lot of the Expo 2020 attractions that will continue going and having a life after Expo 2020, still needs to monitor visitor flows and ensure a safe environment, very similar to how airports monitor how many people go in and out at the same time, or how many people are clustered in one area. So security is something that's critical, and it's something that we have the privilege of having here in Dubai, and we will continue to expand upon that in District as well.
And when we speak of digital and big data, presumably we're also talking cybersecurity as well as surveillance.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, that goes without saying for sure.
Dave, earlier in our discussion, you mentioned projects and moving forward in this space costing billions. Are we seeing enough funding coming through for the future of smart infrastructure?
No, we're not. And just to put it in perspective, billions is maybe more of a widespread number. Obviously, to deploy smart infrastructure technology on a campus or a city does not have to be that costly. But no, we don't. I mean, you know, the capital budgets of a lot of cities or companies, you know, typically are stressed. You know, we typically have a lot of back and forth on, you know, incentives to help pay for technology versus the cost of maybe subsidies or tax increases. And so what I really think is I think you need more public-private partnerships that come into play to help with the implementation of some of the smart technology, because some of the smart infrastructure that we install is good for 20, 25, 50, plus years. So it's a long-term investment. And the other thing that we're seeing more and more these days is a movement towards a different business models where we're moving more CapEx to more operational expenses. And we have more business models as X as a service. And so an example would be energy as a service, or maybe somebody wants a decentralized energy system installed at a local hospital to therefore help with energy security or resiliency compared to the utility grid, but they can't afford it from a CapEx perspective. So this X as a service enables the resilient, secure, efficient system to be built, and then the customer pays for it based on value and based on usage, and therefore that business model and that payback is much more attractive. So I think these creative business models will be needed more and more in the environment, especially where you don't have governments investing heavily into a smart city environment to help implement it over time.
Thank you very much. Nadimeh, Dave, very, very good discussion. Thank you for joining us and coming together for this great discussion on the future of smart infrastructure and the security of our future cities.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure being with you.